My core work in life is to basically call people to the sacred. And I do that in many ways. I do it as a healer, as a friend, as a citizen. And it's really a call to truth. It's a call to the essential. I'm not necessarily promoting any particular religion per se, but simply calling people to the truth within their own hearts that descends from heaven. But this requires real self-honesty and spiritual sobriety. In my work as a healer, people are coming to me in a time of need, and my greatest, offer to them is really to hold a space where they can see themselves and understand why and how the things that are happening to them are happening. And sometimes this means facing narratives and choices that they have carried for a long time that have caused a lot of suffering for themselves and the people in their lives. So again, it's that polishing of the heart that I do for myself, shared and extended to other people. So a typical day for me is to wake up for the morning prayer and do a core spiritual practice. And depending on the time of year, that sometimes means when I'm done with the practice, I go back to sleep. At other times, I stay up and my day begins. And I will usually have already planned out my day somewhat. I have a set of tasks, things I would like to get done. And then I will have a modest, healthy breakfast. And then I get to work. And so I will review patient files. I do a lot of writing. I'm currently writing a multi-volume series on Islamic medicine, responding to patients and emails, and then I will treat patients, and at some point in the day I will do a physical practice of yoga, qigong, which will take about an hour and a half. And then I come back and get back to work. For me, my work isn't work in the way that so many people unfortunately experience work. Work for me is really exciting and inspiring because in every conversation I have with people, whether they are patients or friends or acquaintances, in some way I'm almost always talking about the sacred, about truth, about the beautiful and profound things of life in a deep way or in a lighthearted way. Everything circles back to that for me, whether it's an exchange on Facebook or a conversation with a friend. It always comes back to that center. And so throughout the day, during my pauses, I will sometimes I often sit in silence and think deeply about some spiritual theme, usually triggered by a world event or a patient who reaches out with a need. And every week carries a theme, as if God wants me to focus on some theme of life, of existence, in any given week that needs to be developed. And invariably, all the patients I treat that week will be focused on the same theme. Evidencing that there's something bigger going on, that isn't just, a person's particular thing that week, but actually that we're all being stewarded through the universe in a way that's profound and meaningful, and we're being guided, we're being, as I say, taken to school. That every day God is taking me to school and taking all of us to school and teaching us what we don't understand and bringing us closer to integrity, to truthfulness about ourselves and our lives and the world that we live in. And this is something beautiful and profound. So it's very interesting to have personal conversations with people while simultaneously being aware of the national situation and the global situation on the exact same theme. So, of course, throughout the day, as a practicing Muslim, I pray 5 times a day. My day is, some people would say interrupted, but I would say punctuated. That actually I feel a really powerful call. I'm pulled to the prayer rug. And no matter what I'm doing, I feel agitated when the time for prayer comes if I'm being delayed and I'm not getting to it. And then, of course, in the evening, my practice is longer. And I will spend time in this practice that we call, after praying, I will spend extra time in the dhikr, the invocation. Again, this core practice in the Islamic tradition. And then I will sit in meditation. So that's really the central thread and lifeline of my day, the spiritual practice. And everything organizes itself around that. When it happens, though rarely, that my spiritual practice schedule is really thrown off, those days are very challenging because that thread that keeps me on center has been disrupted. And that is really not accidental at all. We live in a time where we have an abundance of food available to us. A lot of it mass-produced. We are exposed today much more to poisons as a result of the mass production of food, pesticides, hormones. And so it takes a fair amount of intelligence and research to live well today, to live safely. So I'm very careful about what I put into my body. I'm careful not to eat too much, which is a problem, especially in our country, here in the United States. To not make food too complicated, a meal having too many ingredients. To eat organic as much as possible, in season, local, and the spiritual component of food is incredibly important. So of course in the Islamic tradition we're very scrupulous about any animal products that we consume being slaughtered, for example, in the correct way, in a sacred way. So if an animal is traumatized when it's slaughtered, then all of those stress chemicals released into the bloodstream in the moment of trauma sink into the flesh of the animal. And when you consume that kind of meat, you will become a more anxious and aggressive person because you are consuming those chemicals that are sitting in the flesh of that animal. So in general, it's actually a problem in the Muslim community, the excessive consumption of animal flesh. I would actually recommend no more than a small amount of animal flesh, of meat, once every 40 days. Whereas many people are eating meat every single day. So I can speak for myself, that's far too much. So I eat meat very sparingly, and I eat mostly vegetables and whole grains and fruits. And so whole grains are very important, and organic as much as possible. And, if you're going to consume eggs, pasture raised, organic, range fed with non-GMO feed and so on. These are all important. And you have to keep up with the knowledge, because the labels are constantly changed to fool people. And to be very careful of sugar we consume. We consume sugar today in a way that our ancestors never did. The sweet flavor has become a staple in a way that people of old did not have. And so it's important to understand that the way that we experience and know and relate with food today is very different than people of old that ate very simply and ate far less. And their days really weren't structured around food in the way that our days have been structured. By the grace of God, Islamic medicine is really in a period of revival. There have been a few Ibn Sina conferences to review the work of the great Muslim polymath physician Ibn Sina, and an international conference on cupping therapy, scholars coming forward, and practitioners of Islamic medicine creating courses and giving workshops. So it's really in motion, especially in these last few years, which is very encouraging. My hope is that this little prototype of a center that I built here that we would eventually, the community, actually have our own Islamic health education retreat center, where we would have a teaching hospital, training facilities, classroom space, a prayer space, beautiful grounds where people can go hiking, so we would be immersed in nature, have an organic farm, have an animal farm, a CSA, a wellness restaurant, a library to collect manuscripts and classic texts of the Islamic medical tradition, and a fully integrated medical center where we would also have modern medicine, but we would have all of the modalities of Islamic medicine present. All those that I'd mentioned earlier, from counseling to aromatherapy and hydrotherapy and manual therapies, herbal medicine, food medicine, in a facility that would function in a way like hospitals do, where you have a team of people focused on a given patient, giving full attention and evaluating them from every angle. And it would be really spectacular if the community ever has something like this, where we are both treating patients, serving the community, and training the next generation of physician healers. Again, not simply physicians and not simply healers, but really that combination of the art and science of traditional Islamic healing and medicine. This is my long-term goal. It's possible I would never achieve this in my lifetime, but one of my hopes is that the people who hear this story, who have the means and the heart and the motivation, might step forward and lend their support. If I had a facility, I could provide to students and professionals and patients an immersion experience in the healing arts that is extremely powerful and profound. So imagine, I'll paint a picture for you, that you arrive in this facility, you park and you leave your car and you check into the retreat center. You have any number of these natural treatments available to you. You can be treated, you can take a yoga class, a meditation or qigong class. Then you go for a meal in our wellness restaurant where the entire menu is designed according to principles of Islamic medicine. And to end your day, you go into the hydrotherapy center and let's say you spend some time in a steam room where where you have medicinal herbs being steamed into the air that you're breathing in, that's having a healing medicinal effect in your body. And so imagine that this is your patient experience, or maybe even as a student, you're coming here and you're learning. In order to really cultivate embodied knowledge, you really need the immersion. Today, many people ask for, they ask me often the question, can we do this online? And it's it's a little, disappointing that people have forgotten this way of learning that was experiential. That so many people think today that, sure, I can study Islamic medicine or anything on the computer, just by listening to a few lectures and reading a few books. And it really doesn't work that way. There is not a single profession that I know of where the final stage of training that really makes you skilled does not in some way involve an apprenticeship. To become a professional engineer, you have to apprentice under a professional engineer for several years. To become a physician, you have to do rotations and an internship. And in most cases, that hands-on component is really the most precious. And so, in my own family history, my great-grandfather, who was part of a community of Persians that migrated to Burma, was quite a prominent figure in the community and was exceedingly generous. He had built many prayer centers, Islamic centers, and I asked my father how many, and my father said that he lost track, that he had built so many. On Fridays, after the congregational prayer, he would give swaths of fabric to the poor people in the local village, and he would feed all of them. And this he did every Friday. And so this kind of generosity and service and deep consideration for people and the greater community is a thread that runs through my family. And I don't think that I came up with any brilliant idea on my own by any stretch of the imagination. I actually know that I moved from a deeper place by God through spirit, and that my ancestors are all supporting me from the other side. And and it's not that they're hoping that I or anyone else becomes great, but rather that we simply fulfill our responsibility as human beings to take care of those that are the least among us. And so I really believe that I'm just really doing the bare minimum, that this is what I need to be doing. And if the support is there, it would really be a great blessing. And if it's not there, then I'm very content to enjoy the blessing of, something small. So one of the very powerful, formative experiences I had growing up, when I would get sick, my father would treat me. He would pray over me, and he would apply herbal liniments on my body. He would cook up medicinal soup, and he would do some manual work on me physically. And once recovered, he would actually have me reciprocate the things that he had done for me. And so over the course of many years, so basically since the age of 6 until my father passed away, I would work on him. And I would work on him with the knowledge that he had shared with me, as well as everything I'd learned from other teachers. And imagine, as a child whose speech, whose language and conceptual framework is very simple, if not non-existent, you're working on another human being, and you're gathering experience through your fingertips, through your hands, and through your center, through your heart. So within short time, as a small child, I was able to find on my father's body his chronic places of holding and his injuries, as well as restrictions that would emerge just from the course of daily living. My father was a World War II veteran, so he had some damage in his body from bullet wounds, and these were places that I was working on during my entire life with him, that he would always have to be careful of and compensate for. And so this was extremely powerful. So I knew how to treat people before I had really any concept about what that meant and how it all worked. As they say, your fingers do the walking. And so for me, it was very much that my hands were that I was engaged deeply below the mind. And if you were to ask me what I was doing, I'm not sure I would have been able to explain anything at all at that time. So it was not until I was in college that I actually really realized what I had. Because when you grow up with something in the household, and it's a part of your everyday life, it's how you eat, it's how you understand the nature of food and what you mix together and what you absolutely never mix together, and why you eat this particular food at such and such time and you would not eat it at this other time. So all of these things that I grew up with, this wisdom that was brought to me through my father, I didn't know that other people did not have this knowledge until someone pointed it out to me. So while I was in college, a friend of mine who was a massage therapist was teaching a workshop and asked me to be his guinea pig. And so I agreed. And in the course of working with him, I would reciprocate the techniques that he was showing the students. And he looked at me and he said, "How did you learn how to do that?" And I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "A person may study massage for years and not be able to execute the technique in the way that you just did it." And then it was at that point that I took a step back and I started to investigate and ask questions and research and study. And gradually I realized that I had this incredible wealth of embodied knowledge. And at the time I was actually studying engineering. So I made a decision to complete that degree and dedicate my life to healing. It was really an incredible moment in my life journey when this door was opened, and it was an incredible moment in my life. So when I began to read and study with different teachers, I discovered that much of what they had to teach me was already in my body, and it was now simply a question of bringing language to it and understanding it in the context of the bigger picture. At the same time, however, I also realized that I had a lot of spiritual work to do. That the key to really understanding what is going on with people is very much dependent on the depth to which you've explored yourself. So if you are veiled from your own center, from your own heart, if you are unaware of the motivations and desires behind your actions, then you will not be able to hold a space of healing for other people. You will not be able to understand what they're really going through and why they are making the choices that they are making, for better and worse. So I was only able to help people in so much as I had gotten in touch with my own inner being. And so I realized that if I was really going to be a healer and to be whole and integrated and to help people dealing with very heavy and difficult circumstances, I would have to grow up. I would have to look deep into myself, evaluate myself, and study myself. And I found that the greatest textbook of life and possibility, it was the textbook of my own soul. And it was at that moment that I found spiritual guides and became very close students of them and followed them everywhere and hung on every word. And then now this was the spiritual journey that I underwent, which is, a process of an alchemical transformation of the heart. Moving from being crude and heavy and rusted and, dirty to going through a process of clearing and purification and organization. And that has really been the richest part of the journey, to really become human in the true sense of the word. The capacity to feel is central to the human experience. My ability as a healer to know what people are going through is very much rooted in my ability to simply feel. To the extent that I'm armored and closed off from my feelings is directly related to the extent to which I will not be able to know what is going on with another person. So this is critically important, that to become fully human and integrated and healthy and connected with life and people, one has to activate and awaken the heart center, which rules the heart organ but is something deeper. It's not limited to simply this fleshy organ that we have in our chests. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, is said to have said in a famous narration, hearts rust like iron, and their polishing is with the remembrance of God. And this is a profound statement. When we understand today, for example, heart disease is basically the oxidation of your body tissues. And what is rust? Rust is oxidation. So when body tissues oxidize, they become rigid. So in the same way that if you take a piece of meat and you put it on the countertop to thaw out before you cook it, if you leave it out too long, it begins to go from being to having luster and being, let's say, a full maroon to becoming gray. That's oxidation. It goes from being supple, flexible, and pliable to being rigid and somewhat inflexible. When you hold a diseased organ that is, on display for learning purposes, a healthy organ has a certain amount of flex, a certain amount of give when you bend it. However, if you bend a diseased organ, it actually cracks like a dried out rubber band. So imagine people with any kind of oxidative stress in the body. When it reaches a significant point, your tissues are inflexible and you are physically rigid. And this correlates directly with rigidity of experience, rigidity in the soul. So if you're physically rigid, what will you be like emotionally and mentally? So it was known, it has been known for thousands of years by the sages and the masters who had insight, profound insight into the human condition, that expansiveness, spaciousness, flexibility of the soul correlates directly with spaciousness and flexibility of the body. So in the context of my work as a healer, one of the ways in which I've been able to really deeply understand people and hold a space for them for healing is because of my own spiritual exploration of what you might call the spiritual body, which is made up of divine qualities. And part of that spiritual work, it's like if you imagine that the heart is like a lens, and the lens can get dirty. And if divine light in the form of virtue is to transmit clearly through that lens, one needs to keep it well polished. And so the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is saying here that the polishing of that lens is through the remembrance of God, which is a core, fundamental spiritual practice in the Islamic tradition of invoking the names of God or the great name of God to polish the lens of the heart, to clean it. And when you do that, extraordinary things begin to happen. It is a process that I call becoming. That one moves from being a sort of disintegrated, fragmented human being like Pinocchio, if you recall the Pinocchio story, to becoming a complete human being that is integrated, that knows who he is, where he comes from, and what he was sent to do in this life. So the reason why it's important for practitioners of Islamic medicine to be believers is because one cannot engage the ultimate reality, God, for insight, for understanding, and for healing without being in relationship with that divine reality. It is not merely a concept. It is part and parcel of existence. God, has been described as the fabric of being itself, the cause of existence. So imagine trying to engage that intelligence without actually believing in it. It doesn't work. And so for this reason, one must be a believer. One must be cultivating and developing that relationship, which is through one's own heart center. And it requires of the practitioner a personal spiritual work. The depth of one's ability to be present to help another person, to have insight into them, and then to become a transmitter of that divine light and those divine qualities, mercy, compassion, love, kindness, patience, forbearance. In order for all of that to come through, it takes work. And so, two different people reciting, let's say, the same verse from the Holy Book may have a completely different impact on a patient based on the quality of the practitioner's relationship with God. In my studies of the other systems of traditional medicine, primarily Oriental medicine, Indian medicine, and Tibetan medicine, I have found that they all actually share Tawhid, this sense of the oneness of existence. And once upon a time, in order to practice those traditions, you needed actually to be a practitioner of the spiritual paradigm of those traditions. As those sciences have been increasingly secularized with the standardization of those systems of medicine, this is less the case today, that you can in fact be a practitioner of Tibetan medicine today without being a practicing Tibetan Buddhist. This has its advantages and its disadvantages. I think it's ultimately problematic because you're really missing the heart and the beauty and the source of power of the medicine. Islamic medicine, however, because it's so deeply tied to the Islamic tradition, it will likely be impossible for those two worlds to be split, for a person to practice Islamic medicine without being a person of faith who believes in God and who cultivates that relationship with God. As far as the technical side of Islamic medicine is concerned, over the course of 1400 years, Muslim physicians actually met with quite extensively practitioners of these other systems and shared knowledge with them. There were several international conferences held over the course of several centuries, actually, where Tibetan medicine, for example, was compiled. The Tibetans took Oriental medicine, namely Chinese medicine, Indian medicine, Arab, Persian medicine, and the local folk medicine of the Bon people, and that's what has formed Tibetan medicine. So if you were to study any of these traditions, you would actually see that they share almost all the same techniques, many of the same theoretical constructs, and most of the same core principles. And the only thing that's really different is language, symbolism, and the outward architecture of the tradition. And so this says a lot about nature itself, that we find what's true is eternal, and these systems of medicine were committed to truth and seeing things as they really are. So they drew many of the same conclusions, which is very, very satisfying as a student of traditional medicine.